Hollywood has shaped how most people imagine Roman warfare, but almost everything we see on screen is wrong. Real Roman combat wasn't about flashy moves, giant swords, or dramatic duels. It was about precision, discipline, and battlefield engineering that made the Roman army one of the most effective military forces in history. To understand how Rome actually fought, you have to look at the techniques behind their weapons, the shield work, the short thrusts, the formations, and the tactics that Hollywood never shows. Number 1. How the Roman soldier actually held his shield. Most people picture a Roman soldier holding his scutum like it was some oversized wooden slab, swinging it left and right as if he were trying to block sword strikes the way movie stunt performers do. But the real technique behind Roman shield use was built on efficiency, body mechanics, and years of training that made even basic movements purposeful. A Roman legionary didn't simply hold his shield with his arm strength. He locked it into his entire body structure. The grip on the scutum was positioned behind a central hand grip connected to a reinforced boss, so the soldier wasn't just grabbing a handle. He was anchoring the shield with a joint that let him transfer impact into his torso rather than his wrist. When pressure came in, instead of meeting it with an arm block, he let his body absorb and redirect it without losing balance. The scutum's curved design was intentionally engineered to guide incoming force to the sides. Instead of brute blocking strikes, the shield made hits slide away naturally. This allowed a soldier to stay stable even when multiple enemies pressed against him. Hollywood usually portrays shields as flat panels that stop blows like walls, but in reality, Roman shields were more like shock absorbers. A legionary stood with his shield close, tucked in near his left shoulder, knees bent, feet firm. The power behind every shove didn't come from the arms. It came from the legs, hips, and core. Short, sharp steps were the foundation of Roman formations because they kept the line tight. Big movements created gaps and broke formation, so instructors constantly corrected posture to ensure every man stayed close enough to feel the shield of the soldier next to him. Behind all of this was the doctrine that the shield wasn't just for defense, it was a front-line offensive tool. The upper rim could smash into an opponent's face, especially at close range where enemies were vulnerable and off balance. Roman manuals emphasized that knocking an enemy's jaw, nose, or teeth, even without graphic injury, could destabilize him long enough for a fast Gladius thrust to follow. This shield strike wasn't chaotic. It was a controlled tool to break rhythm, disrupt footwork, and create the tiny opening needed for the next step in the Roman sequence. Movies rarely show this because it's not flashy, but to the soldiers who trained every single day, it was second nature. The scutum structure also influenced how formations stayed tight. Because each soldier held his shield slightly angled, the shields naturally overlapped with those of the soldiers beside them. This overlap created a near-continuous defensive line, especially in the front ranks. The visual effect of this wall advancing was intimidating, but even more importantly, it ensured that no legionary ever fought alone. Every man's shield contributed to the strength of the formation. When the front rank pushed forward, the weight wasn't individual, it was collective. Inside the formation, the scutum acted like a personal doorway that a soldier fought from behind. The curved shape let him peek around the edge, while exposing only a fraction of his body. Soldiers were taught to keep their right side hidden behind the shield as much as possible, leaving an attacker with almost nothing to exploit. The left side of the Roman soldier was the armored side with the shield, protecting his heart and torso. Hollywood often ignores that the scutum was huge for its time, sometimes nearly covering a man from shoulder to knee. So the legionary essentially fought from behind a mobile bunker. Training also focused on endurance. Holding a large shield for hours required strong shoulders, so Roman marching drills doubled as strength conditioning. Soldiers carried these shields daily on long marches, building natural stamina. When battle came, the fatigue that would cripple an untrained fighter didn't affect them nearly as much. This combination of posture, mechanics, and discipline is what made the Roman shield wall so durable. It wasn't dramatic, but it was incredibly effective, something Hollywood often overlooks in favor of exaggerated movement. Number 2. The Gladius wasn't used like a longsword. The Gladius is one of the most famous weapons of the ancient world. Yet it's also one of the most misrepresented in movies. Hollywood sword fights usually show long, sweeping swings and extended duels full of spinning attacks and fancy blade choreography. But the Roman gladius wasn't designed for that kind of fencing. It was short, compact, and built for thrusting. Its blade length made it perfect for close-quarters fighting inside tight formations, where soldiers didn't have the luxury of raising their arms high or stepping back for a wide swing. A legionary's fighting space was often only a few inches between himself and the man next to him. The thrust was the foundation of Roman swordsmanship. A quick stab required minimal movement and delivered maximum effect, allowing the soldier to stay protected behind his shield. Instructors trained recruits to perform thrusts without exposing their bodies. Keeping elbows close to the torso meant the blade moved in straight, controlled paths. This method offered speed, precision, and endurance, three qualities that made Roman infantry so deadly against less organized opponents. A barbarian warrior who relied on powerful overhead swings needed time, space, and full upper body rotation. The Roman soldier needed none of that. He stepped forward, thrust, stepped back, reset the shield, and repeated. The edge of the gladius was sharp enough to slash when necessary, but slashing was secondary. The Romans didn't want large arm motions that created openings. They wanted fast, economical movements that an enemy couldn't predict. Even the weight distribution of the gladius supported quick thrusts rather than sweeping cuts. And because the blade was shorter, it allowed soldiers to maintain their formation, staying locked shoulder to shoulder without bumping or disrupting the men beside them. Training was relentless. Roman recruits drilled stabbing techniques thousands of times. They trained against wooden posts to perfect accuracy and practiced stepping forward in unison, so thrusts could be synchronized across a whole rank. Imagine dozens of gladius points emerging from a shield wall at the same moment. This kind of coordinated action broke morale quickly. It wasn't individual combat, it was controlled repetition. The Romans understood that the most effective attacks were simple, quick, and delivered from a stable platform. Hollywood also tends to show sword fights as extended duels. But Romans didn't duel. Their fighting style was built around quick engagements measured in moments, not minutes. Once a thrust landed or the enemy broke formation, the next assault followed. The gladius was meant to exploit chaos, not create a dance. This is why Roman soldiers could battle for long periods. They weren't wasting energy on giant swings. They fought smart, conserving strength and letting discipline do the work. Even the design changes from the Gladius Hispaniensis to later models reflect tactical refinement. Early gladi had longer blades, but over time the Romans shortened them for even more efficient stabbing in dense formations. Movies rarely show these variations, but each one reflected battlefield experience accumulated across centuries. Number 3. The pilum was a smart weapon, not just a throwing spear. In most films, the pilum is shown as nothing more than a simple throwing spear, sometimes launched in slow motion for dramatic effect. But the real pilum was a far more clever piece of engineering. It wasn't designed primarily to kill enemies at long distance. It was designed to destroy their equipment and break their formation before the clash even started. The pilum had a long wooden shaft with a thin, elongated iron shank at the front. This iron portion wasn't fragile. It was meant to bend after impact. When the pilum struck an enemy shield, the soft iron shank warped, making removal extremely difficult. The weight caused the shield to tilt downward, rendering it nearly impossible to hold effectively. The moment the enemy lost his shield, or even struggled with it, the advantage swung sharply toward the Romans. A disarmed opponent was vulnerable, exposed, and far more likely to panic. Roman commanders knew this, and they structured entire battle openings around pila volleys. When the opposing line raised their shields, expecting arrows or a charge, the Romans hurled their pila with timing, designed to hit the shields precisely at the worst moment for the enemy. This wasn't random throwing. Soldiers practiced throwing pila in arcs that maximized impact and disruption, not distance. Hollywood ignores this tactical sophistication. Instead, movies show pila being used like light javelins meant for long-range kills. But Roman soldiers rarely depended on pila to kill. Their biggest value was psychological and tactical. An enemy line that lost its shields before the melee couldn't stand against the disciplined push of a Roman formation. Even if the initial volley didn't cause casualties, the effect on battlefield organization was devastating. A warrior who couldn't raise his shield properly had no realistic way of defending himself in the coming clash. The pilum's design evolved over centuries. Some versions had wooden pegs that broke upon impact, increasing the bending effect. Others weighted the shank so the pilum would hit with more force. Still others included barbs, or features meant to anchor into shields. But the principle stayed the same. Ruin enemy defenses before the fight. No Hollywood scene ever shows an opponent forced to drop his shield because a pilum warped and dragged it downward. Another overlooked aspect is timing. Romans usually threw pila at very close range, sometimes just a few dozen feet. This made them harder to dodge and increased the odds of hitting shields. Soldiers often threw pila right as they were about to charge, so the enemy had no time to recover or reorganize. A disordered front line couldn't withstand the disciplined Roman advance, making pila one of the most effective softening tools in the ancient world. Number 4. Roman soldiers didn't fight as individuals. If you watch Hollywood battle scenes, you'll often see 1 or 2 Roman soldiers separated from the line, swinging wildly, battling multiple opponents in chaotic duels. But real Roman warfare didn't work like that at all. Legionaries didn't fight for personal heroics. They fought as pieces of a coordinated machine. The success of Rome came from discipline, synchronization, and the ability to maintain structure even in the heat of battle. A Roman soldier wasn't expected to beat opponents one-on-one. He was expected to hold his position, support the man next to him, and function as part of a living system that extended across the entire battlefield. The formation itself provided more protection than individual skill. When the first rank stepped forward, the second rank was right behind, ready to assist or rotate in. When someone grew tired, he moved to the back, and the next man stepped forward without breaking the line's integrity. Training emphasized team movement. Recruits drilled until every shift in formation felt instinctive. They learned how to push forward using collective force rather than personal strength. The line advanced like a compressing wave, using steady pressure to force the enemy backward. Even the way soldiers breathed was coordinated. They were told to conserve energy and match the pace of the formation instead of fighting frantically. This unity allowed Romans to overcome opponents who were individually stronger or more aggressive. A lone warrior swinging a heavy weapon might overpower a single soldier, but he couldn't withstand a synchronized wall of shields and short blades. The Roman style of combat wasn't glamorous. It wasn't meant for duels. It was optimized for battlefield efficiency. Hollywood often portrays Roman combat like gladiator fights, but legionaries weren't gladiators. Gladiators performed in arenas. Soldiers fought in formations. The difference in mindset and training was enormous. A legionary relied on the man beside him as much as his own weapon. This mutual confidence allowed Roman armies to maintain cohesion even under pressure. When part of the line faltered, the organized structure allowed nearby soldiers to stabilize the formation quickly. Number 5. The formation was a weapon too. When people hear testudo, they imagine the famous Roman turtle formation being used constantly, as Hollywood loves to show it. But the testudo was a specific tool for siege situations, not standard battlefield use. In open combat, Romans relied on formations built for pressure, aggression, and controlled advance. The standard Roman line wasn't passive. It was built to suffocate the enemy's momentum. In formation, shields overlapped horizontally, creating a solid wall. Soldiers stepped in unison, driving forward with steady force. This constant pressure forced enemies into tighter and tighter spaces where they couldn't swing or maneuver well. A soldier trapped in front of a Roman formation found himself unable to use his weapon effectively because he couldn't raise his arms or step back. Meanwhile, the Romans used their short thrusting gladi from behind the shield wall with minimal effort. The formation also allowed rapid rotation. When the front rank grew tired, they simply stepped back, while the second rank stepped forward. This tag team system meant Roman soldiers didn't burn out quickly. Meanwhile, an undisciplined enemy force had no such luxury. They exhausted themselves with aggressive swings and chaotic movement. Hollywood rarely captures this slow, methodical pressure. It's not as dramatic as cinematic duels, but historically it was devastatingly effective. The formation acted like a moving barrier that squeezed the life out of enemy resistance. It wasn't flashy, but it was nearly unstoppable when executed correctly. Number 6. Armor was much lighter than movies. Suggest movies constantly show Roman soldiers moving as if trapped inside rigid metal cages, but the real equipment allowed far more mobility than most people imagine. The larica segmentata, the armor people usually associate with the early imperial legions, weighed around 9 kilos distributed across curved metal plates. Because the plates overlapped and were strapped together with leather, the armor flexed with the torso. Legionaries could twist at the waist, duck, lean, and absorb blows because the segments shifted slightly instead of locking the body in place. Some actors in Hollywood struggled just to lift their arms in replica armor, which creates the false impression that historical soldiers were sluggish. In reality, the winning trait of larica segmentada was efficiency. The curved plates were shaped to deflect incoming attacks downward or sideways, not absorb them head-on. This meant fewer blunt injuries and less fatigue during long engagements. Many veterans favored larica hamata chainmail because it offered even more freedom in the shoulders. The weight was distributed evenly around the torso, which made it feel lighter than it actually was. When wet, the rings could be shaken out quickly, and the mesh absorbed hits by redistributing force across hundreds of small links. Because the rings moved independently, hamata gave soldiers excellent range of motion. The shoulders remained loose, allowing for constant shield work and rapid thrusts with the gladius. Even the lorica squamata scale armor was more flexible than movie costumes typically portray. Its overlapping scales acted like a metallic version of fish skin, bending with the body while still offering solid protection against slashes and glancing blows. Helmets were also misunderstood. A proper Roman helmet, such as the imperial Gallic type, included cheek guards and a neck guard that curved outward to deflect hits. It didn't block vision the way theatrical versions do. The brow ridge provided shade and helped divert downward blows, but remained thin enough not to weigh the head forward. Roman soldiers could make quick lateral movements, turn their heads constantly in formation, and maintain awareness of the battlefield. Legionaries trained extensively in helmets because the army understood that unfamiliar gear drains stamina. After months of drilling, soldiers were so used to the equipment that it felt like a second skin. Even the shield the heavy scutum often described as burdensome was engineered for long-term endurance. At around 8 to 10 kilos, it may sound heavy, but the vertical grip at the center allowed the soldier's bones, not just the muscles, to carry the load. The rectangular curved shape wrapped partially around the soldier, distributing pressure across the torso when bracing. Roman soldiers learned how to rest the shield edge on the ground during pauses without breaking formation. They developed small tricks, like shifting weight between feet or adjusting elbow angle to avoid fatigue. Hollywood versions often show Roman troops gasping for air after a few minutes of screen fighting, but in actual training, legionaries marched 20 miles in full gear, carrying packs, tools, and rations on top of their armor. Physical conditioning was part of their lifestyle. When they arrived on the battlefield, they weren't struggling to breathe. They were ready to move as a coordinated unit. Their armor didn't transform them into walking tanks. It turned them into durable, long-lasting fighters who could withstand repeated shocks without losing mobility. The reality is simple. Roman armor wasn't designed to intimidate visually. It was designed to keep soldiers alive while allowing them to remain fast, flexible, and alert. That blend of protection and mobility is exactly why Rome's infantry dominated for centuries. Modern films almost never capture this because heavy, clunky armor looks dramatic, while efficient engineering looks ordinary. But the truth is, a Roman soldier could sprint, climb siege ladders, kneel, rotate positions in formation, and fight rapid engagements without ever feeling trapped inside his gear. And that mobility was essential for the real Roman fighting style. Number 7. Roman soldiers used psychological warfare. constantly. When people think of Roman warfare, they imagine disciplined formations and ironclad soldiers, but they rarely consider how much Rome relied on psychological warfare. The Romans understood human fear better than almost any ancient civilization, and they weaponized it long before the battle even started. Their goal wasn't simply to defeat the enemy physically, it was to break their will. Before a fight, Roman horns and trumpets blasted deep, resonant tones across the battlefield. These weren't random noises, but structured signals that communicated orders while terrifying opponents. Many tribal armies were used to chaotic shouting, not uniform rhythmic sound. The Romans amplified this difference. Shields slammed in perfect sync, thousands of hobnailed sandals stomped on the ground, and metal plates clattered across armor belts in a violent chorus. This mechanical rhythm created a psychological barrier long before the first clash. To many enemies, Rome sounded like an approaching machine rather than an army of men. Even the visual presence of a Roman column was intimidating. Legionaries marched in straight, tight lines that never wavered. Their pace was consistent. Their weapons were uniform. Their armor shined not for decoration, but because Roman officers emphasized cleanliness as a mark of discipline. Barbarians watching this approach often saw something eerily calm. The Romans didn't rush. They advanced steadily, projecting absolute confidence. This contrast shattered the nerves of enemies who depended on emotional surges, war chants, or instinct. Roman standards. The eagles, signa, and vexilla were also psychological weapons. Losing a standard meant disgrace. Gaining one meant glory. Soldiers fought harder near them, while enemies recognized the symbol as a declaration of Roman inevitability. Even the glitter of the metal atop a standard could catch the sun and create an imposing effect. Once a battle began, Roman discipline became another form of psychological pressure. Tribal warriors often fought with individual bravery, but they were not used to seeing an entire enemy line move as a single, unbroken wall. When one Roman soldier stepped forward, the others matched his rhythm. When a man rotated back to rest, the replacement stepped in perfectly. The enemy felt as if they were fighting an endless wall of identical fighters. That consistency broke morale faster than any single wound. Romans also used silence strategically. Sometimes, instead of roaring and slamming shields, they advanced quietly. No shouting, no chanting. Just thousands of armored men walking toward the enemy without hesitation. That silence was terrifying. It suggested control, calculation, and the absence of fear. Many soldiers described the eerie feeling of watching the Roman line move with mechanical certainty. After battles, the Romans displayed overwhelming power by lining up captives, gathering spoils, constructing trophy mounds, or marching prisoners through settlements. These actions sent a clear message to surrounding tribes. This is what happens to those who resist. In regions where Rome wanted long-term control, psychological warfare mattered more than battlefield victories. Fear stabilized entire provinces. Hollywood rarely shows these details because psychological warfare is subtle compared to flashy sword fights. But the Romans relied heavily on fear, rhythm, symbolism, confidence, and discipline. These invisible tools crushed enemy morale and made Roman victories faster, quieter, and more predictable. Understanding the mental side of Roman warfare reveals how they defeated larger armies without relying on brute force alone. Number 8. The Roman backup weapons matter. More than you think, modern films focus almost exclusively on the gladius when showing Roman soldiers, but the reality is that legionaries carried a wide arsenal of secondary tools that played crucial roles in survival. These weren't optional extras. They were part of a complete system of close-quarters combat where every centimeter of space mattered. The pugio, the small Roman dagger, was far more than a last-resort blade. In extremely tight melees, especially after initial shield clashes, soldiers often found themselves pressed so close to the enemy that there wasn't enough room to thrust effectively with a gladius. The pugio's compact size allowed quick, targeted strikes into soft areas like the lower ribs, hips, or neck. It was meant for situations where mobility was limited and reaction time had to be instant. Because it could be drawn fast, the pugio acted as a close-quarters equalizer when formations broke or bodies piled up, moments Hollywood almost never portrays accurately. Some legionaries also carried small utility axes, not full battle axes, but compact hand tools used for camp construction, woodcutting, and siege work. In emergencies, these tools became effective chopping weapons. A Roman soldier might strike at an exposed limb or use the blunt side to stun an opponent. While not standard issue in every unit, these tools added versatility to the individual soldier's kit. Another overlooked element was the cingulum militare, the Roman belt. This wasn't just decorative. The metal plates and fittings were deliberately designed to jingle while the soldier walked. That metallic rattle became part of the Roman battlefield identity. It signaled discipline, confidence, and unity. To enemies, the sound of thousands of singular approaching was a psychological blow. Hollywood often portrays Roman soldiers as moving silently, but in reality, the Roman military presence could be heard long before it could be seen. Even the sheath and scabbard designs mattered. Roman scabbards were built for quick draws that didn't require dramatic swinging motions. The blade could be pulled straight up or slightly forward, depending on personal preference. Because of the formation-based fighting style, speed mattered more than showmanship. The Gladius was often sheathed on the right side, so soldiers didn't bump into each other's gear, another detail movies often ignore. Throwing weapons also mattered beyond the pilum. Soldiers used lead sling bullets, known as Gladius, either by supporting auxiliary troops or during sieges. These bullets could whistle in flight, creating another layer of psychological pressure. Some bullets were inscribed with insults meant to intimidate or humiliate enemies. Together, these secondary tools formed a complete combat ecosystem where no movement was wasted. Roman soldiers didn't rely on a single weapon to win a battle. They used layers of offense and defense adapted to tight formations, shifting terrain, and chaotic melees. Hollywood rarely touches on this because small weapons and subtle tools don't look dramatic. But in real warfare, these backups saved lives, kept formations intact, and allowed Roman soldiers to dominate at close range even when the Gladius couldn't operate efficiently. Number 9. Roman combat was messy, fast, and brutally efficient. The polished, beautifully choreographed sword fights in movies bear almost no resemblance to real Roman combat. In truth, Roman engagements were shockingly fast. The average exchange between two frontline soldiers lasted only a few seconds. By the time a barbarian warrior finished swinging a large sword or axe, a trained legionary could stab 2 or 3 times. This wasn't about athleticism. It was about technique, discipline, and efficiency. The first step was always the shield. The scutum wasn't just defensive, it was an offensive tool used to disrupt balance. A typical Roman strike sequence began with a short, violent shield shove aimed at the enemy's mouth, nose, or chest. This impact knocked the opponent backward or upward, creating a brief opening. Immediately after the shove, the legionary stepped in with a small forward motion, keeping his center of gravity low and stable. Then came 1 or 2 fast thrusts with the Gladius, aimed at exposed flesh beneath the ribs, around the groin, or between armor gaps. There was no wide swing, no posing, no blade-on-blade parrying. The Gladius wasn't designed to duel, it was designed to end fights almost instantly. Footwork mattered more than Hollywood portrays. Soldiers trained to keep their steps short and controlled because long steps threw off balance. A legionary's stance was compact, allowing him to recover quickly if pushed or struck. Even the way they breathed mattered. Instructors taught them to exhale sharply with each thrust, similar to modern martial arts techniques, increasing power while preventing overextension. Real Roman combat was also messy. Shields banged constantly, armor scraped, men slipped on mud or bodies, and formations compressed until soldiers could barely move. In these moments, precision mattered more than strength. Legionaries were trained to keep their elbows in, maintain a compact guard, and rely on tactile awareness rather than sight. If a soldier couldn't see clearly because of dust or blood, he used touch feeling the pressure of bodies around him to gauge when to strike or brace. Because the line advanced constantly, Dead and wounded soldiers were often trampled unintentionally. Romans accepted this brutality because hesitation endangered everyone. The push-stab advance rhythm created a grinding effect where enemies were slowly backed into worse positions. Many battles weren't decided by dramatic kills, but by pressure. Once the enemy line bent or hesitated, the Roman formation expanded the gap and exploited it. What movies rarely show is the exhaustion factor. Roman combat wasn't one long continuous fight. Soldiers engaged for a minute or two, then rotated to the back to rest while fresh men stepped forward. This rotation system allowed the formation to maintain near constant pressure without burning out. Meanwhile, enemies who fought individually didn't have this luxury. Their swings got weaker, their footwork sloppy, and their reaction time slower. The Romans counted on this. Discipline and controlled respiration beat wild aggression almost every time. This style of fighting didn't look cinematic. There were no long duels, no dramatic spinning attacks. It was controlled violence, quick, methodical, and often over before the eye could follow. Hollywood focuses on spectacle, but the Romans focused on results. Their efficiency is exactly what made them so deadly on the battlefield. Number 10. Why Hollywood gets Roman weapons wrong. The biggest reason Hollywood misrepresents Roman weapon techniques is that real Roman combat simply doesn't look exciting on camera. Tight formations, short thrusts, and efficient movements lack the theatrical flair that audiences expect from action scenes. Directors want sweeping sword arcs, sparks flying from blade-on-blade impacts, heroic duels, and dramatic slow-motion moments. But the historical reality was completely different. The Gladius wasn't designed for cinematic swings. It was engineered for small, precise stabs that killed quickly and safely. The scutum wasn't a heavy door for blocking wide attacks. It was a mobile wall for absorbing pressure and creating openings. The pilum wasn't a flashy throwing spear. It was a calculated tool for disabling shields. And Roman soldiers didn't fight as individuals. They fought as one coordinated machine. Hollywood ignores the rotation system because it removes the idea of a heroic soldier standing alone. But that rotation is exactly why Roman armies could fight longer than their enemies. The movies also exaggerate armor weight to create artificial tension, making it seem like Roman soldiers struggled just to walk. In real life, Roman equipment was among the most advanced of its era, designed for maximum endurance. Another reason for Hollywood inaccuracies comes from the influence of medieval and fantasy tropes. Viewers expect sword fights to resemble fencing or heroic duels, so directors frame Roman battles through that lens. But Roman warfare was closer to organized construction work, with each soldier performing repeated, drilled motions rather than improvisational combat. Finally, Hollywood often avoids showing Rome's psychological warfare because it's subtle. The synchronized marching, booming trumpets, clashing belts, and terrifying wall of shields approach aren't immediately dramatic to modern audiences. But these elements were essential in breaking enemy morale before physical combat even began. Understanding the real techniques behind Roman weapons reveals a different picture of ancient warfare. Rome succeeded not because of cinematic flair, but because of discipline, engineering, and relentless efficiency. Their weapons worked seamlessly with their formations, training, psychology, and logistics. Everything was designed for survival, control, and dominance. And while movies might ignore these details for entertainment value, the truth behind Roman combat is far more impressive than anything Hollywood puts on screen.